The road twisted like a serpent, winding its way through the dense trees that had already begun to wear their autumn coats. I could feel the weight of the world slipping from my shoulders with every mile I drove, the tension in my neck easing as I navigated the familiar curves. The mountain house awaited me, a refuge from the chaos of life that had become increasingly overwhelming. It was my sanctuary, a place where silence reigned, and the only sounds were the whispers of the wind and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The thought of its solitude enveloped me like a warm blanket. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles whitening as I passed the sign that read, "Welcome to Pinewood Heights." This was it, the moment I had been yearning for. After years of teaching and raising my son, Jake, I finally had the chance to retreat into myself. My heart quickened with excitement as I imagined long walks on the trails, evenings spent with a good book, and the soothing aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. But as I drove deeper into the woods, the sense of peace I craved began to intertwine with an unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't seen Jake for a few weeks, and our last conversation had left me feeling more disconnected than ever. It was as if we were speaking different languages, each of us locked in our own worlds of misunderstanding. The thought of seeing him again filled me with both anticipation and trepidation. As I approached the turnoff to the cabin, I noticed another car parked in front of it. An unfamiliar, sleek sedan that looked out of place in the rugged surroundings. My heart sank, a cold knot forming in my throat. I parked my own vehicle, the crunch of gravel beneath my tires echoing in the stillness. I stepped out, the crisp mountain air hitting me like a wave, and braced myself for the unexpected. When I opened the door to the cabin, the familiar scent of pine and old wood greeted me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the sounds of laughter and conversation. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the warmth of the space wrapping around me like a forgotten embrace. The cozy living room, with its large fireplace and worn furniture, felt foreign now, as if it had been transformed by the presence of others. "Mom," Jake's voice cut through the chatter, and I turned to see him standing there, his expression a mix of surprise and something else, perhaps guilt. He was flanked by Emily, his wife, who wore an apologetic smile, her hands clasped in front of her. But what truly took me aback was the presence of her parents, Bob and Linda, seated comfortably on the couch, their laughter ringing like chimes in the air. "Surprise!" Emily chimed, but I could hear the underlying tension woven into her cheerfulness. My heart felt heavy in my chest. The world I had envisioned for myself, the solitude, the peace, was crumbling before my eyes. "Surprise?" I managed, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I felt the room closing in on me, the air thick with unspoken expectations. I had come to this haven seeking refuge, yet here I stood, an intruder in my own home. Jake stepped forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, a gesture I recognized all too well. "We figured you'd want some company," he said, his voice steady but his eyes darting to the floor, as if he too felt the weight of the moment. Company. The word echoed in my mind, bittersweet and heavy. I had spent so many years nurturing my family, pouring love and effort into every interaction, yet now I felt the walls of my sanctuary closing in. "I just wanted some time to myself," I admitted, the truth slipping out before I could catch it. Emily's smile faltered, her eyes searching mine for understanding. "We thought you might like to spend some time together. We wanted to make sure you're okay, after everything." Her voice trailed off, and I could see the worry etched into her brow. "Everything," I echoed. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. It was not just the retirement I had to come to terms with, it was the discontent that had simmered beneath the surface of our family dynamics, a tension that had become almost palpable. I could feel Bob and Linda's eyes on me, their well-meaning concern only adding to the pressure. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, but they spun like leaves caught in a whirlpool. "I just wanted to recharge. I thought I could find some peace up here." Jake shifted his weight, his gaze flickering from me to Emily, and I could see the conflict etched across his face. "We understand, Mom.
But maybe we can all recharge together." His voice was soft, almost pleading, and I felt a crack in my resolve.
The room was thick with tension, and I could see the hesitation in Emily's eyes. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to bridge the gaps between me and Jake, but I could sense the strain it was putting on her. I took a step back, my own feelings of intrusion bubbling to the surface. "I'm not trying to push anyone away," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But this is my space. It's where I come to breathe, to think, to be alone." "Mom, it's not just your space anymore," Jake said, his tone shifting from gentle to defensive. "We're a family now, and we need to figure this out together." Together. The word hung in the air like a fragile promise, and I felt the walls of my heart begin to crack. I had spent so many years holding on to my ideals of independence, believing that solitude would solve my problems. But perhaps true relaxation didn't come from isolation. Maybe it was about understanding and embracing the relationships that had shaped me, even when they felt tumultuous. As I glanced around the room, I saw Bob and Linda exchange worried looks, their expressions mirroring my own inner turmoil. I felt a wave of empathy wash over me for all of us. We were simply trying to navigate the unpredictable waters of love and obligation, each of us clinging to our own fears and hopes. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Can we really talk about what's going on? About how we can all find some peace? Together?" I watched as the tension in the room began to dissipate, small sighs of relief escaping from the corners of mouths that had been tightly pressed. Jake nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly, and Emily's eyes lit up with hope. The path ahead was uncertain, a mountain trail obscured by fog, but perhaps it was one worth exploring. I could feel the warmth of their presence surrounding me, a delicate thread woven between us, binding our hearts in a complex tapestry of love and obligation. As we settled into a circle on the floor, the weight of the moment hung in the air, heavy yet hopeful. I took a deep breath, ready to navigate the conversation that lay before us, knowing that the journey would be fraught with challenges. But as I looked into the faces of my family, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within me. Perhaps this was not just a drive to my mountain house. Perhaps it was a journey toward understanding, a path that could lead us all, together, to a place where peace could flourish amid the chaos of family life. I could feel the knot in my stomach slowly unraveling, the weight of expectation lifting as we began to share our truths. But just as I was about to speak, a loud crash echoed from outside, jolting us all. My heart raced anew, uncertainty flooding my senses as I turned toward the window, the promise of our conversation hanging in the balance. What could possibly disrupt this moment of connection? I held my breath, the silence now tinged with suspense as we collectively turned to face the unknown. Driving up the winding mountain road, the world outside my car window transformed from the familiar hum of suburban life into the untamed beauty of towering pines and rugged cliffs. Each bend in the road brought a sense of escape, a deep breath, as if the trees themselves were exhaling tranquility. I could almost feel the weight of the past years slipping away, those long days spent in the classroom, the endless meetings, the nagging feeling that I was always on someone else's timetable. At 55, I had finally carved out a moment for myself, a chance to find solitude in the mountain house that had been my sanctuary for decades. As I approached the gravel driveway, the tires crunching softly beneath me, a flutter of anticipation danced in my chest. I envisioned the cozy evenings wrapped in a thick blanket, a mug of herbal tea in hand, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Perhaps I would finally have time to read those novels stacked on the shelf, their spines cracked but untouched. My heart raced with the promise of solitude, a long-awaited retreat from familial obligations. But as I rounded the final bend and caught sight of the cabin nestled among the trees, a sudden chill gripped my heart.
The front porch light flickered as if to mock my fantasies, and my breath caught in my throat. There, on the steps, were familiar figures. Jake, my son, laughing with Emily, my daughter-in-law. Beside them stood Bob and Linda, Emily's parents, their presence a jarring note in my envisioned symphony of solitude. Panic surged through me, tightening my chest like a vice. I parked the car with shaky hands, the engine ticking quietly as I sat there, grappling with the reality before me. My mind raced. How had this happened? I had booked this respite months in advance, a promise to myself for peace and quiet. Instead, here was a scene of laughter and warmth, and I felt like an intruder in my own refuge. I stepped out of the car, the cool mountain air wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace. My heart drummed in my ears as I walked toward them, forced smiles plastered on my face like a mask. Each step felt heavier than the last, the gravel shifting beneath my feet. I had arrived for solitude, but found a family gathering instead. A kaleidoscope of emotions swirling within me. Confusion, anger, a twinge of betrayal. The air felt thick, almost electric, and I could sense the shift in their laughter as they turned to face me. "Mom, you're here!" Jake's voice was bright, but I noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, a reflection of his own conflicted feelings. He stepped forward, opening his arms wide, but I hesitated. Instead of the warm embrace I longed for, I felt a swell of resentment rise within me. This was my space, a sanctuary to unwind, not a stage for family drama. "Surprise!" Emily chimed in, her eyes sparkling with a mix of enthusiasm and apprehension. I could see she had been trying to maintain harmony, but the tension in her smile betrayed her. "We thought it would be nice to spend some time together." "Together?" I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "I didn't realize you were all coming." Bob and Linda exchanged glances, their expressions a blend of guilt and defensiveness. Linda stepped forward, her voice soothing. "We didn't want to impose, Sarah. We thought a family weekend would be good for everyone." Her intentions were kind, but the undercurrent of their decision felt like a breach of trust, an uninvited intrusion into my carefully crafted plans. I felt a flood of heat rise in my cheeks, the clenching in my stomach tightening as I forced myself to breathe deeply. My desire for solitude was battling an overwhelming sense of obligation, an internal tug-of-war that left me feeling raw and exposed. I had always prided myself on being strong-willed, but in this moment I felt like a leaf swept away by a relentless wind. "Really? Because it seems like I'm the only one who wasn't consulted," I replied, trying to keep my tone measured, but the sharpness of my words surprised even me. I could see Jake's face fall, the hurt in his eyes cutting deeper than I expected. Emily's expression shifted to one of concern, her nurturing instincts kicking in, while Bob and Linda stiffened, their well-meaning intentions now seeming to falter. "Mom, we just thought it would be nice," Jake said quietly, his voice almost pleading. "We wanted to help you unwind." "Help me unwind," I laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the cool mountain air, by turning my quiet retreat into a family reunion? The words spilled out before I could catch them, and I immediately regretted the frigid tone. I could feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken words hanging thickly in the air, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Emily stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to mediate the brewing storm. "Sarah, we love you, and we thought—" Her voice trailed off, and I could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire for family versus the need for my personal space. "We just thought it would be nice to be together. We can adjust if you need some time alone." Adjust. The word struck me like a match against this fragile emotional landscape. Could I truly express my need for solitude without dismissing their affection? I felt like a jigsaw piece forced into a puzzle where I didn't quite fit, and yet, deep down, I knew the truth. My family was here because they cared, even if their presence felt suffocating. Let's just take a moment, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I need to process this. I turned away, my heart racing as I gazed at the majestic mountains standing sentinel around us. Their towering forms grounded me, a familiar metaphor for my own struggles. Mountains have their own way of looming. Sometimes they seem insurmountable, but they also remind us of our strength to climb. As I stood there, breathing in the crisp air, I felt the conflicting emotions roiling within me. I wanted solitude, yes, but could I also embrace the love that brought my family here? The thought of navigating this new terrain, of having an open dialogue about our needs and boundaries, felt daunting. Yet it was a necessary conversation, one that could steer us toward understanding. I turned back toward them, ready to face the truth. If true relaxation came not from isolation, but from embracing family relationships, perhaps this was my opportunity to redefine what that meant. Would it be possible to carve out space for both my needs and theirs? The answer remained suspended in the air, a delicate thread waiting to be woven into a new understanding. The drive up to the mountain house was supposed to be a moment of liberation, a chance to leave behind the noise of my everyday life and finally breathe. I had imagined myself on the porch, sipping coffee while the sun broke over the horizon, the silence of the woods wrapping around me like a soft blanket. But as I navigated the winding road, my heart began to thump a little harder in my chest, the anticipation of solitude mingling with a growing sense of dread. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the crunch of stones beneath my tires echoing in the stillness. My palms were clammy against the steering wheel, and I took a moment to inhale deeply, letting the pine-scented air fill my lungs. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, my retreat after years of teaching, of being a mother, of carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. But as I stepped out of the car, the sight that greeted me sent a jolt of confusion through my gut. There, spilling out of the front door, were my son Jake and his wife Emily, both caught in a moment of laughter. Behind them, I caught sight of her parents, Bob and Linda, their presence looming large like shadows in the late afternoon sun. My heart sank, the anticipation of serene solitude evaporating into a thick fog of confusion and irritation. I had hoped for peace, not a family reunion. "Mom," Jake called, his voice ringing with an enthusiasm that felt painfully out of place. I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "We didn't know you were coming. Come on in." He stepped toward me, arms open wide, and I hesitated, my body stiffening as he enveloped me in a hug. I could feel the warmth of his affection, but it was quickly overshadowed by the chill of my own discomfort. This was supposed to be my time. "Hi, Sarah," Emily chimed in, her warm eyes sparkling with a sincerity that made it difficult for me to feel anything but guilt. "We thought we'd surprise you. We just love this place, and your parents were so kind to lend us their time here." "Surprise," I managed, though the word felt like a stone lodged in my throat. I stepped over the threshold, the familiar scent of cedar enveloping me, yet it felt foreign now, tainted by this unexpected intrusion. My mind raced, grappling with the tension that hung thick in the air, a tangle of emotions that felt like a knotted ball of yarn, impossible to unravel. As I moved into the living room, I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, a subtle pressure that made my skin prickle. Bob and Linda were seated comfortably on the couch, their relaxed postures a stark contrast to my own rigid stance. Bob looked up, a broad smile on his face, while Linda busied herself fixing her hair as if preparing for a family portrait. I could almost hear the unspoken thoughts swirling around us. How could she be upset? Isn't family what she wanted? "Come, sit," Linda urged, patting the space beside her like an invitation to a seat in a theater. I crossed my arms tightly, feeling suddenly exposed. I had spent so long in the role of the caretaker, the nurturer, wearing my heart on my sleeve, but now I felt like a child lost in a crowded room. Actually, I was hoping for some quiet time, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. The words hung in the air, awkward and heavy. Jake's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his features, but before he could respond, Emily interjected.
I totally understand. We all need that sometimes. How about we all just settle in and relax together? We can plan some fun family activities. Her tone was upbeat, but I could hear the strain in her voice, the effort to smooth over the tension. It was a thin veneer of diplomacy stretched over a chasm of miscommunication. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening. Fun family activities? I wasn't here for that. I was here to escape, to find solace in the solitude I had envisioned so vividly just hours before. The thought of board games and laughter felt suffocating, like being trapped in a room filled with balloons that were ready to pop. Maybe just a little time alone first, I suggested, searching their faces for understanding. The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Jake looked at me, his brow furrowed, and I saw the conflict swirling in his eyes. He wanted to please everyone, but I could sense he was also aware of my discomfort. "Mom, we just want to spend time together," he said softly, his voice a gentle plea. I hated the way it made me feel, as if I were the villain in this unasked-for family drama. Linda chimed in again. "We can all be together, and then if you want some time to yourself later, we'll respect that." Her tone was well-meaning, but it felt like a trap. The implication that I was being unreasonable hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to burst and flood the room with unspoken grievances. As I stood there, the tension palpable, I felt my breath quicken, the familiar rush of anxiety creeping in. My vision narrowed, focusing on the way Emily's hands twisted nervously in her lap, the way Jake's jaw tightened as he wrestled with the urge to intervene. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, and I wanted to scream, to push back against the tidal wave of family obligation that threatened to drown me. Instead, I took a step back, my body instinctively seeking distance. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a relentless drumbeat of frustration and confusion. I just wanted some time to myself, I finally blurted, my voice trembling with unintentional vulnerability. "Is that too much to ask?" The silence that followed felt like a chasm, the distance between us growing wider as my words settled like stones in the pit of my stomach. I could see the flicker of surprise in their eyes, the realization that perhaps I wasn't just being difficult, I was struggling. Jake shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair, and Emily glanced at him, her expression a mix of understanding and concern. I could sense the struggle within them, the desire to bridge this gap, but unsure of how to do it. "Mom, we love you, but we also want to share this time together, to make memories. Can't we find a way to do both?" I felt my breath hitch in my throat, the weight of their expectations colliding with my need for solitude. My chest tightened, the walls of the room closing in around me. I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, a wave of emotion threatening to spill over. As I stood there, caught between my desire for isolation and the pull of family, I realized this moment was more than just about me. It was a reflection of the complexities that came with love and obligation. Perhaps true relaxation didn't come from escaping into solitude, but from navigating these tangled relationships with honesty. But in that moment, I was still far from any resolution, the tension hanging in the air like an unresolved chord, waiting for the next note to break the silence. I could feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken questions lingering just beneath the surface, and I knew I had a choice to make. Would I sink into my own fears? Or could I take a step forward into the unknown, risking vulnerability for the chance to understand? The answer hung tantalizingly out of reach,
and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold.
The meal began, and as we passed around dishes piled high with food, the conversations flowed like the wine that was poured liberally into our glasses. I watched as Jake and Emily exchanged glances, their silent communications revealing layers of their relationship that I had yet to understand. I felt like an outsider looking in, a ghost haunting the periphery of their lives. Each bite of food lodged in my throat like a stone, heavy and uncomfortable as I fought to swallow my own feelings of exclusion. "Bob, how's the new project going?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation away from the unspoken tension. He launched into a detailed account of his latest endeavor, animated and engaged, but I could see the way Linda's eyes darted toward Emily, as if gauging her reaction to every word. The table felt like a teetering tower of cards, each new topic threatening to unravel the fragile balance we had created. As the evening wore on, the laughter seemed forced, the smiles strained. I caught Jake's eye at one point, and in that brief moment of connection, I saw the flicker of his own discomfort mirrored back at me. I could feel the walls closing in, the suffocating weight of expectations and obligations pressing down on me. My heart raced as I realized how easily all of us had fallen into roles that no longer fit. I was still trying to be the mother he needed, while he was trying to be the son I had raised. "Bob, you should come visit us more often," Jake said, trying to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. His voice was earnest, but I could sense a hint of desperation behind his words, a plea for understanding that was both touching and painful. "I thought I was giving you space," I replied, my tone sharper than intended. "I thought you wanted to build your own life." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I could feel the tension shift, a palpable crackle that seemed to draw the attention of everyone around the table. "Of course we do," Emily interjected, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "But family is important too. We all want to be close." I could hear the underlying plea in her words, the desire for harmony clashing with the reality of our complexities. Close, but not too close, I thought, the metaphor bubbling up in my mind like a simmering pot on the stove. I had always cherished my independence, the solitude that allowed me to breathe and reflect. Yet here I was, drowning in a sea of expectations and unvoiced resentments, struggling to find my place in a family that no longer was just mine. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. I caught a glimpse of Linda's worried expression, and for a moment I felt a pang of empathy for her too. She too was caught in the web of family dynamics, trying to navigate a path that felt increasingly treacherous. "I just want us all to be happy," I finally said, my voice softer now, tinged with vulnerability. "But I don't know how to do that when everything feels so complicated." The admission hung in the air, a fragile thread that could either mend the rift or unravel us completely. Jake reached for my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "We'll figure it out, Mom. Together." As I looked around the table, I realized that perhaps true relaxation didn't come from solitude after all. It emerged from understanding and embracing the beautiful mess that was family. But I also knew that the path would be fraught with challenges, and the road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. As I glanced out the window, the soft glow of twilight enveloped the mountain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a conversation that needed to happen. I felt the weight of my own expectations pressing down, a storm brewing beneath the calm surface. The night was far from over, and I sensed that the dinner table was about to become the battleground for truths we had long avoided. And somewhere within that simmering tension, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer that perhaps we could find our way through the complexities of love and obligation, though the journey ahead remained cloaked in shadows. As I turned off the engine of my old Subaru, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot sent a rush of nostalgia through me. The mountain house had always been my sanctuary, a place where the clamor of life faded into the whisper of pines and the distant call of crows. I'd spent too many years caught in the whirlwind of teaching, raising Jake, and trying to be the perfect mother. Now,
At 55, I was finally free. The thought of solitude fluttered in my chest like a restless bird. I stepped out into the crisp mountain air, my lungs filling with the scent of pine and the coolness of impending autumn. It felt good to be here, in this space that had cradled my dreams and sorrows alike. The sun was dipping behind the peaks, casting long shadows that danced upon the ground. I could already feel the weight of the world lifting, the knots in my shoulders loosening as I took a deep breath. But as I turned toward the house, a strange unease settled in my stomach. The front porch light was on, a beacon in the twilight that seemed out of place. I squinted, my heart quickening. I hadn't invited anyone. It was supposed to be just me, my escape, my retreat. As I stepped closer, I could hear laughter spilling out from inside, a sound that twisted the knife of my solitude. The door was ajar, and I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob, the wood warm against my palm. I could turn around, leave, and find a motel somewhere in town, but that thought was quickly extinguished by the ache of disappointment that pooled in my chest. I had come all this way. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking like an old man waking from slumber. The sight that greeted me was a tableau of domesticity I hadn't expected. Jake, my son, sat on the living room floor, building a tower of blocks with his daughter, a tiny girl with a wild mane of curls I hadn't yet seen in person. Emily was perched on the arm of the couch, her parents, Bob and Linda, flanking her like two well-meaning sentinels. "Mom!" Jake exclaimed, a mixture of surprise and guilt flickering across his face. The joy he felt at seeing me was undercut by the tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. I forced a smile, though I could feel the warmth of it falter. "Jake, what's going on? I thought I'd have the place to myself." My voice wavered slightly, betraying the calm facade I desperately wanted to maintain. Emily stood up, her expression morphing into something diplomatic, yet troubled. "Sarah, we didn't mean to intrude. We thought it would be nice to spend some time together in the mountains. It's been a while since we all got together." She tucked a few strands of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture that echoed my own inner turmoil. "Together," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "This is my retreat, my time to unwind. I didn't expect to share it." The room fell silent, the laughter that had filled it moments ago evaporating into the awkwardness that settled between us like a heavy blanket. Bob shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing, while Linda crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. Their intentions were good, but intentions were often like clouds. Fluffy and light, but capable of blocking the sun at the moment's notice. I had come here for peace, and instead found the very thing I thought I had left behind: family obligations. "Mom, we really didn't think it would be a problem. We just wanted to make some memories as a family. We thought you'd be okay with it." The air thickened with unspoken words, and I felt the walls of my sanctuary closing in around me. "You thought wrong," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. A wave of guilt washed over me as I saw Jake's expression falter, the hurt lacing his features like cracks in a porcelain vase.